So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. If you weren't able to join us today, would like to welcome Dr. Mark McCaulin, as always. Hello, Mark. Mark and I do these chats every Thursday afternoon between 3 and 4 at the moment. It's been part of a series during the COVID-19 crisis, and we're on session 11 of 12 today. And the subject for today is all about managing stress. So we will probably spend about 20 minutes doing a bit of Q&A and hopefully providing some useful information that people can take away and apply in the workplace, or at least think about when helping to manage your own stress, or maybe the stress of employees that you have responsibility for at work. So the background to why we're talking about this today, as I said at the beginning, this is part of a series that Mark and I have been running just to help get some information out into the public about health-related matters that may be a benefit to people as they manage themselves in lockdown and or as they start to get back into the workplace. Lots of people have been at home for a long period of time, and some people have been working from home and working in the workplace with skeleton teams. And so the whole dynamic has changed around work in the last 3 or 4 months. And we certainly feel here at MPH that over the next few weeks, as people get back into the workplace, they're going to have to contend with a different dynamic in work. Processes will have changed. The culture may have changed a little bit. I think people are going to be much more aware of their surroundings and how people are, because everybody knows somebody who's been impacted by COVID-19. So really, with all that in mind, we wanted to talk about how does that manifest in terms of personal stress, and what can we do to help look out for it, manage it, and be responsible employers as people come back into the workplace, just to help keep everybody's levels of stress under control. Because at the end of the day, we all want a happy workforce, and a happy workforce is a productive workforce. So let's keep looking out for each other and see what we can do. So I've got a number of questions which Mark always very professionally answers for me. I've got the easy job here, just asking the questions, and Mark provides all the clever answers. So we'll start off with difficult question number 1. What is stress, Mark?
I've often heard people say, I don't really know what stress is, and I've certainly heard organisations say we don't have any stress, which is quite a big comment to make. Stress, I think we can define it as the unpleasant emotional experience that we go through when the resources that we have as an individual are outstripped by the demands upon us. So it manifests in a whole series of sort of physical symptoms and emotional symptoms, but there can be responses in our body to do with the pressure that we feel we're under and the way that we perceive the environment around us as a threat. And that's what's often coined as the fight or flight mechanism, which is where our bodies go into a situation where we're either going to stand and fight our ground, or we're going to run away. And so there are physical responses like a rapid pulse rate and sweatiness, and our breathing changes, and our muscle tone changes. We get ready for either a scrap or to run away. And then on the emotional side, there's all the psychological symptoms that people get with stress, where they feel they haven't got the time or the resources or the energy or the knowledge to deal with the situation, which is they can feel anxious and worried, they can feel low, their mood can drop, they can feel overwhelmed and hopeless that they can't cope. And in extreme situations where people are under a prolonged pressure and they feel stressed and anxious for a long period of time, that can lead to illness where they become chronically mentally unwell with it, and that can affect their outlook on life and their productivity, their success in terms of the day-to-day activities and the longer-term sort of plans that they have.
Oh my, that's sort of a lot in there, really. I mean, I think probably historically people, I don't know whether it's a stiff upper lip kind of syndrome of being a Brit, but people don't like talking about stress, and they don't like talking about mental health issues. And of course, this is a mental health problem in many respects, although different people will view things differently. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of people find it difficult to talk about stress and to understand what it is, or they don't like to admit to the fact that they're experiencing stress in some shape or form. Unless it relates to physical stress, and for some reason that's okay, because everybody has to have a bit of physical stress in their life. But when it comes to the more subtle mental health related stress, people don't still like to talk about it, despite the number of campaigns that are out there encouraging people to talk more. So, as responsible employers and as friends and family looking out for one another, you've touched on a little bit of the background as to why stress happens, that fight or flight response. But if we were just, looking out for it, even if we haven't experienced it ourselves and we don't know what that's really all about on a personal level, if you're looking out for other people, what are the key telltale signs that you might see in a colleague that you might be working alongside that will suggest to you that they might be feeling stress in some shape or form?
I think one of the obvious things is some form of sort of behavior change, really. And I think we're all used to our moods fluctuating and there being periods of our lives or periods of the day and week where we're perhaps not in quite such good form as we might usually be. But a colleague who is under a lot of stress and not coping with it very well is likely to demonstrate some attitudinal and some emotional behaviors which are a bit unusual for them. So it may be that they're slightly more irritable, short-tempered with their colleagues, snapping in meetings, perhaps being a bit overbearing and potentially a little bit bullying in situations where they feel that they're backed in a corner and the only response is to fight their way out, that, metaphorically speaking, clearly. And I think changes a sort of routine. So people who go off their food, they're not eating, they look fatigued, they look tired because they're not sleeping at home well at night, and just that sense that somebody's perhaps not their usual self and not performing as well as they might normally do at work. Those are subtle things which you can pick up just when you know people well and have worked with them for a while. You pick those things up just from being around them, as well as, of course, the explicit ways that people can demonstrate stress by saying to other people, I'm not coping, I can't manage this, it's too much for me, I don't know what you're talking about, I can't do what you're asking me. There are ways that individuals can express their stress and their emotion, and certainly for some people that might be even breaking down in the workplace. They might burst into tears, or they might feel they have to leave and go home because they can't cope with the pressure that they're under. So those would be sort of from one extreme to the other in terms of simple signs and indicators that people might not be coping particularly well.
Yeah, so I suppose, when people come back into work and, we are looking out for one another and trying to pick up on some of these cues, if we notice that people might not be behaving quite as you would expect, or they're exhibiting some of these signs and symptoms that you've talked about, what do you think, what would we normally advise people to do in the first instance as a way of trying to, if you like, placate or help someone who seems to be demonstrating signs of stress?
I think the first thing to do is to try and build rapport with them. Now, that may be very easy because it might be a colleague that you've worked with for years and you know really well, and you've got a great deal of instant sort of connection with them. On the other hand, it may be somebody that you don't know particularly well, and when they are stressed and they're feeling already at a low ebb, the worst thing that somebody can do is say, come into my office, sit down, I think you're stressed, what's going on? Because that direct approach is too much. And often what you'll need to do is to be able to develop an environment in which that individual feels relaxed and secure enough to be able to open up and talk about how they feel. And that doesn't happen instantly. It's about inviting them in for a coffee maybe, or a chat, and just the very general stuff to begin with, building the rapport, building the relationship and the communication, so that they understand that this is about them, it's focused on how they're feeling and how they're managing, and then gently introduce the possibility that perhaps they're demonstrating a few signs of stress, that they're not perhaps doing as they would usually do and behaving as they would usually behave, and find out from them what their perception of the situation is. And often it's much better to ask questions and just sit back and wait and listen to the answer than it is to try and provide some solutions immediately to a problem that they may not even recognize themselves. They may not even have got to that stage yet where they fully understand what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there'll be people coming back off furlough, going back into the workplace, who will be feeling levels of anxiety and stress, and there'll be a lot of uncertainty in their minds as to what's going to change for them, and many will be worrying about long-term job prospects. Will their job even be there in 3 or 4 months' time, even if they do manage to get back to work? I mean, that's the worst case scenario, and we hope that businesses will get back on their feet quickly and manage their employees well back into the workplace, and they will flourish, of course. But the reality will be there will be a lot of people coming back into the workplace who will be harboring an awful lot of concerns, which will manifest in stress and anxiety. And I guess we spend a lot of time advising businesses and writing occupational health reports on the types of adjustments that people can make for people trying to get back into the workplace. And, of course, we try to be as objective as we can with this sort of thing. But if we were starting to look at someone who was displaying signs of stress and anxiety and coming back into the workplace, putting our occupational health hat on here, what sort of measures actually would we be advising businesses to take just to help reduce the impact of stress in the workplace for an individual? I know we often look at various practical things that people can do in workplace, but are there any kind of top tips that we would just float out there as general considerations that people can take when they're trying to create an environment within which people are likely to perform better with less stress if it's being picked up that people are vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it very much depends upon the individual, and that's the key thing. Insight is going to be the most important tool you've got for dealing with an individual who is stressed, and because everybody's so different, and we all have different levels of set points, if you like, of what we can cope with and what we can't, and different perceptions of what particular stresses or threats mean to us. Insight into how they perceive the situation and what they believe the threats to be is absolutely vital, and particularly when we're talking about bringing people back off furlough or back into a workplace where they're worried about COVID risk, it's going to be about understanding what their perception of that risk is and how that can be mitigated. The HSE and other occupational health advisors talk about doing a stress risk assessment. And that's really an exercise where you go into a little bit of detail with somebody about what it is that stresses them about particular situations or environments or activities, and just try to understand it better. HSE have got some stress management tools, which is effectively just a series of headings that you use to discuss and trigger an exploration, a discussion around particular aspects of people's work and their day-to-day activities, which might be the source of stress for them, and then use that to formulate a management plan to mitigate those stresses and try and reduce them. And often it's fairly simple stuff. Do I understand what my role really is here now? Do I understand what's expected of me? Do I have really clear performance targets? And if they're too high, I'm stressed because my performance targets are too much. Is it possible that we can reduce those a little bit? Is there a way that I can work a bit more flexibly so I don't have to be in crash of dawn in the morning at 7 o'clock? Can I potentially come in at 8:30 and work a little bit later in the evening? All of these things are very individual, because for some people, their home life will be impinging upon their work significantly and adding stress. For other people, it's got nothing to do with home. It's just to do with being at work and particular activities they do at work, whatever it may be. So I think the key approach is to understand first, isn't it? Is to ask the questions so you understand what the stresses are, and then formulate a shared plan for reducing the stress, managing the stress. Often we can't get rid of the risk altogether. We're not talking about saying, well, that's not going to happen, or that that's not a risk, that's not a hazard. But what we can do is we can mitigate it as best we can. And if an employer is seen to be doing something active and supporting the individual, that goes a very long way to reassuring them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, of course, there's a duty of care that employers have to, helping to make adjustments and manage people effectively in the workplace. And there's lots of practical steps, that people should be taking if they're managing their staff well, as you say, around performance targets and making sure that people don't feel overworked, if you like. Of course, people need to be doing their jobs and being helpful and productive in the workplace. But I think one of the stresses that's going to manifest over the next 2 or 3 months is there will be undoubtedly many businesses that are going to want to do a bit of a regain on the downtime that they've had, because they're going to want to bring revenues into the business that they've lost just simply to help recover the business. And there will be a natural tension between what they ask people to do to try and get the business back on its feet and what is actually practically possible for individuals to cope with. And that, I'm sure, will be felt by many different people in different ways. Some people will have a level of resilience that will they'll be coming back on all 10 cylinders and wanting to max out in terms of what they can do and might cope very well with that. And others, for all sorts of reasons, will come back and be firing off on 2 cylinders, and it'll take them some time to get there. And I think you're absolutely right. It's about having that insight and that visibility, and being open and asking questions, so that people feel safe as they come back in, and they're not worried that they're going to be driven into the ground, I suppose, by businesses desperately trying to get back on their feet. So taking a common sense approach is probably very, very helpful in that regard. What about, so if we do have, let's assume for a minute that everybody is, taking time to look around and pick up on some of these cues and insights, and they're aware of the general sort of triggers and issues that can instigate stress in someone. Fundamentally, if people are suffering badly, there are things that we can do from a more medical perspective to help calm things down. Let's just deal with the subject of medication. We don't always advocate it, I know, for everything, but we try and sort of allow people to get back into a normal routine through just good healthy living. But there is a place, isn't there, for medication in some circumstances? And if there is, what would that be?
Yeah, I think you're right. The word you used is some circumstances, and that's fine. I would agree with that. Medication's by no means the first step. You would be hoping that way before you got to any consideration about asking for or receiving treatment for stress and any of the associated mental health problems, you would be talking about healthy lifestyle. You would be talking about adjustments in terms of activities, and at work you'd be hoping to try and support somebody. You'd be encouraging people to eat well and to cut down on any of the sort of substances they might be using, whether it's tobacco, whether it's caffeine, whether it's alcohol, or anything else. You'd be encouraging them to exercise. You'd be encouraging them to try and chunk time so that they're getting a decent break away from the thing that's causing them the stress as much as possible. And also you'd be directing them towards forms of social support, whether that's professional help through counselling and talking therapy, or just even practical support through friends and family. But you're right, there comes a point where all of those things, however good they might be and however well-minded they might be, it's just not enough. And medication can help in these circumstances, particularly to give people better sort of support in terms of the physical symptoms that they have of the stress. So we talked about the fight and flight mechanism and the adrenaline, and the fact that disturbs our heart rhythm, and it disturbs our muscle tone, and it makes us feel like we want to sort of tense and like a coiled spring, want to get up and get out. And people can suffer all sorts of problems with tearfulness and panic, and just generally feeling that they can't cope. And medication can help with that in the right circumstances. We can treat people with medication to help calm the anxiety down, but we can also treat people with medication to help improve the mood. That decision has got to be made carefully in discussion with a doctor, and agreement that it is the right thing to do. And in that situation, for people who have got quite poorly with their stress, it can be very helpful indeed. And medication can be a real reliever that just allows people, if you like, a bit of time and a bit of pause to then allow them to address the issues which are causing their stress. It certainly isn't the panacea ultimately. But in the vast majority of people, if with a doctor's guidance and advice they feel it's the right thing to do, there's a good chance that it may help improve some of their symptoms.
Yeah, that's great. It's very helpful. And that's probably a nice place to kind of wrap things up, which is, of course, we are here to provide a professional service to people in the workplace. If people do have any questions or have any concerns about individual employees, then we would certainly advocate that they shouldn't sit on the issue. They should take action early and seek advice, because that one conversation could be all that's needed to help bring down the levels of stress and help to manage it properly, and help to move that individual person forward. So everyone knows well, the people that have found us know we're here to provide that guidance. And yeah, I think that that probably is a good place to wrap things up. I think we've covered quite a few useful topics there, and hopefully given some useful insights into how we would deal with managing stress and what to look for. And if anybody has any more questions, of course, they can reach out and we'll help.
Absolutely. Good.
Okay, well, on that basis, we'll wrap that one up, and Mark and I will be running another session next week between 3 and 4. We do actually have, we're putting some plans in place for Lizzie Simmons, the Olympic swimmer, to join us on a Q&A session in July, we hope. So look out for that. We'll be posting on our social media channels to help advertise that. That will be an excellent session. She's a very energetic and inspiring young woman who has lots to bring to the business workplace from a health and wellbeing point of view. So look out for that one. And in the meantime, have a good week, and we'll see you same time, same place next week. Thanks again, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.